Computational Thinking Final Project using the datasets Airports by Nick Holub. The dataset was broken down into 678 individual airports across the US. Inside each of the airports, there was a site number, runway, schedules, and facility. The site number was a basic string variable. Runways contained 113 elements for one runway of the airport. The schedules were a sequence number and attendance schedule that didn't make any sense, and the facility had 101 different elements inside that about the name, address, location, longitude, and latitude of the airport itself. My abstraction of the data is broken down into length and width of runways, longitude, latitude of airports, the airport manager name, address, phone number. There was also the airport owner, address, name, and phone number, the location of the airport in city, and county, and state. And on the right-hand side of the slide, you can see in the table that there's different airports listed on the left and runway length, width, city, and state at the top to show you sampling of the data from my dataset as abstraction. Limitations of my dataset include there is no data on how much travel happens through airports, so number of airplanes or amount of airplanes stored by different airlines were not, this was not part of my dataset. Identifying the bigger airports is extremely hard. I believe I was able to identify one or two larger airports in a state, but I couldn't tell unless I went into each separate airport to check and find a name and location of it to verify it with the actual airport itself online. Yearly data wasn't available, so I couldn't compare to see if data increased or decreased over certain years, and no human data on the airports was available, such as travel, passengers, or luggage amount. For my first question, I wanted to look at the total number of square miles of runway in the US. So I started by writing a for loop to go through all the airports and calculate the total area. And as you saw in my abstraction, the length and width of runways was in meters, so I had to convert that to miles. And I have a bar chart of all 50 states. I had to break it up into 4 bar charts to fit all 52 states, including DC and Puerto Rico. And I looked at how many square miles in each state of runway there was. In part 2 of question 1, I still was looking at the other 2 graphs, and what really surprised me in these 4 graphs of square miles of runway was I expected California to be large, and I expected Texas and maybe Florida to be large in number of square miles, but Alaska was very large, Vermont was very large, and Maine were all large in their number of square miles, which is very surprising for my data. For my second question, I wanted to look at and see what states have the most airports. Since I looked at runway sizes and lengths in states, I wanted to see if that matched up to how many airports were in each state out of the 678 airports I was studying. And I had to break it back into 4 different graphs for each of the 52 that states and DC and Puerto Rico that I was looking at. Texas was the highest number of airports, coming in at 60 on the right-hand graph here. For part 2 of question 2, I was looking at the number of airports in each US state, and I found that Illinois, California, and Alaska were all really high in their number of airports, but I expected that. And Ohio and Wisconsin also had fairly high numbers, which was surprising. But the most surprising of them all was Vermont having such a low number of airports to such a high runway square mileage. And I, I guess that could be a dataset flaw where they don't have they have more airports than the dataset has, or the runway mileage was input incorrectly, or Vermont just has very large runways throughout the state. For my third and final question, I wanted to look at and see the elevation of the airport, comparing it to the number of airports at that elevation, and see if there was a pattern or inverse relation, which I found slightly, where a lot of airports begin at standard feet in elevation, just above sea level, and it drops off and increases slightly over time to about 1,000 feet in elevation, and drops off completely by 2,000 feet, where very little airports are at 2,000 feet, all the way up to 8,000 feet, where there's only a few, less than 5, at 8,000 feet. For the social implications of my dataset, the stakeholders include airport employees, passengers, stockholders, and companies related to airports, and airports themselves and airlines, and corporate employees of corporate. Each is linked to the airport in a different way. So employees, they are people that work on the tarmac, pilot the planes, assist passengers on the plane, off the plane, and move luggage around, that type of thing. Passengers are the people that pay for the transportation between the cities that they're flying to, different countries, cities, states, wherever. Stockholders are the people that invest in airports and airlines. So that could be a company investing in another company, or people investing in a company, or airline auto part makers for engines or fans or things like that. And corporate manages the employees, and they run the airport business part of the airline. The relation between all these stakeholders is a little different, but they all pretty much relate to money, where corporate is paying the employees are interacting with the passengers like or dislike their experience and possibly invest, and these become stockholders. Stockholders interact with corporate, hearing how the company's doing, and decide to invest more or sell, depends, but they're all related by money to the company itself and to the airport. Overall, on this project, I learned a little bit about airports, different things about runways. I learned about abstractions, stakeholders, and datasets, and even how to code in Python. Thank you for a wonderful semester and a great final project.